Now, the Law Society of Kenya is set to hold its annual general meeting this week. The meeting comes at a time when the push for reforms has been heightened in the country, with the country staring at a potential 2 referendums. Well, in studio with me, I have Harriet Chigai, who is the Vice President of the Law Society of Kenya, as well as Eunice Nganga, a lawyer, to discuss on the push for reforms in the country. Ladies, good morning, and many thanks for making time for us on News Center. Like we mentioned, Harriet, let's begin with you. The push for constitutional reforms has been heightened in the country. And here we are now talking about the Punguza Mizigo Bill, all eyes now turning to the BBI task force after concluding hearings on Saturday. Let's talk about where LSK stands on this very important issue.
Well, I must say it is timely that we're having this discussion now. And just like you've seen, the push for reform is one of our biggest agenda in terms of our annual conference, the theme being an audit of the Constitution. So the debate is coming at the right time when everybody is now talking about how then can we review our current Constitution. Let's audit the Constitution. Where are we? What have we achieved so far? Where are we lagging behind? What are the current regulations that need to be put in place for us to realize the performance in terms of the Constitution as it is right now? So it is important, even as we lawyers and LSK at large, that we participate fully in terms of this debate. It's important that we put our input, because law reforms is one of our biggest mandates in terms of how we shape the laws in this country going forward, and noting that one of our biggest mandates is also to advise the government on matters reforms. So this is timely, and it's important that everybody participates. It's not about lawyers alone, and that is one thing that surprises me, because Kenyans have also taken a backseat. And when we're discussing the issues to do with reforms, all Kenyans must take part. Most Kenyans are actually taking a backseat, and then they realize that things have now moved forward, and then the question begins, where are we? When were these issues passed? Who are these people who are drafting these policies? Where are we? So it's important that everybody, the business community, the lawyers themselves, the persons charged with the economy and policies, everybody must come to the table and discuss matters that affect this country moving forward.
Right.
Yes.
Eunice, let's talk more about that, because, again, this conversation comes at a very difficult time when we've seen succession politics come into play, and it's quite a tough balancing act in the push for constitutional reforms when there's, reforming the Constitution and balancing between succession politics in just a few years to come. But let's talk about the legal framework that is currently in place to enable a constitutional referendum.
There are 2 ways. First, thank you very much for having me. There are only 2 ways allowed by the Constitution by which we can do constitutional reform or changes. Article 256 and Article 257. Article 256 is how Parliament can change the laws without the requirement for a referendum. And then Article 257 is the popular initiative, in which the public must be involved. In both processes, Article 255(1) requires that for certain issues, you must go through a referendum, whether you're doing the 256, that is through Parliament, or whether you take the popular initiative. Some of those issues is if you're touching on the functions of Parliament, if you would like to change the term of the President, those are some of the issues that require you to go to a referendum, whichever way you choose. So for the current processes, both BBI and Punguza Mizigo, the way they look to me, they are going more towards the popular initiative under Article 257.
Right.
And that is why we begin to ask ourselves, for both initiatives, at what point do they engage? And how do they engage? How do we say that the changes being proposed have taken into account the changes the majority of Kenyans would like to see? Do we call people to a public rally? Do we ask people to give us their views online, and then we choose how many people have voted many? Do we call people, like BBI is doing through letters, select few into a 5-star hotel? How do we engage to to know that we have actually collected the views of the majority of the public in order to change the constitution. That is our question number one.
And that's a very important question. Let's take there for a moment, Harriet. Public participation. Really the core of our constitution, the very core of democracy as it is. Where does LSK stand in terms of public participation in both the BBI and the Punguza Mzigo Bill as they are?
Well, first I must say that public participation is very important. Very, very important in any push for any legislation that has to pass through Parliament. But let us audit what public participation has been for the last few years.
Correct.
We have actually misguided Kenyans in terms of what public participation is. Because as my colleague has said, Eunice, you call a few people in a room and you say this is a representation of the entire public, but that's not public participation.
Right.
It's a shortcut towards you attaining the goal in terms of just having it on paper that you've ticked a box, that people have participated, but that's not what public participation it is. If it then means that we have to go to Mukuruajenga slums
Correct.
for us to get the views of the common mwananchi at that particular environment, that is what needs to be done. But we call meetings, small meetings in five-star hotels, well-selected few. You collect maybe a representative from LSK. It depends with who LSK will send. A representative from the NGO world, another representative. That is not public participation.
It's not.
We need to have proper public participation when it comes to matters legislation. We need to have proper public participation where you involve. You know, I like saying it Wanjiko, but let us break it down and say there's Wanjiko, Otieno, there's Luta, there's everybody. Let us have everybody on that table so that we can get...
What is the process of involving everybody? I mean,
it's tedious.
How viable is it? Because at the end of the day, those conducting, you know, the BBI team would say, we're getting professional bodies, we're getting legislators, and the work of these legislators is to represent the Wanjiku on the ground. So when we call the select few to come give their views, and they're representing the views of people from the ground.
Allow me to say that BBI has done it very well. And BBI has gone across the country. They have been everywhere. So I want to believe the report they have is actually something that they've collected from each and every segment of this country. And I think, by and large, in as much as logistics is difficult, we need to get down to the people. And that is the same thing with Punguza Mizigo Bill. I'm sure they are now currently going around, and Eunice can brief us on that.
Right.
How far have they gone in terms of reaching to people? What logistical support do they have? What tactics are they using to ensure that the feedback they have is not from a selected few, but they have actually reached each and every individual in this country in terms of representation? Do you have Mamamboga on that seat? Do you have the artisans on that seat? Do you have a villager whose work is just to sit at home? They really don't know much that what is happening, but they need to speak to somebody or they need guidance, you know? So how far have we gone in ensuring that whatever documents we are presenting, and we call it, it has been well, the common mwananchi has participated. How far have we gone as the team leaders to ensure that this is done? It's tedious, it's a lot of work, but it has to be done. We have to get it right. Otherwise, we'll still be making policies that are not futuristic. We'll be making policies that are not touching on the core heart of the Kenyan mwananchi, and that is something that we have lacked in the past few years that we have to correct.
And we've seen several proposals really being given in terms of the push for constitutional reforms, from an expanded executive to a 7-year presidential term. Eunice, talk to us about some of what is contained, especially in the Punguza Mzigo Bill, that seemingly has not been brought out as it should.
Okay. As a promoter of the Punguza Mizigo Bill, apart from being an advocate of the High Court, I know that the team went out, not now. Initially, they went out to those villages. I personally went to Ngara, I went to Gikomba, I went to my village, just as a promoter, as an ordinary promoter. And what they were trying to do with the limited resources that they have is get a feel from the ground. Okay? And the common thread running through all the proposals from the ground is that people do not have the services that they require. So the backbone of the Punguza Mizigo Bill is how do we bring services to the person in Mukuru kwa Jenga?
Right.
How do we get the services to my grandmother in the village? How do we make sure that she walks to her dispensary and gets medicine and a nurse, and there's an ambulance to take that pregnant woman in that village, and the road there is passable, and there is clean drinking water there? That is the backbone of Punguza Mizigo Bill. So from the feeling of what people were saying, they will not tell you we need an expanded visa, because from the ordinary Kenyan, that is too technical. So what they tell you is, we would like to have water here. We would like to have a good road. We would like this hospital equipped and nurses. We would like to have an ambulance so that people do not have to stress when they are going to hospital at night and all. Once they give that to the experts, remember Dr. Ekuru Aukot is a constitutional expert, then he led the team in determining what can we do to make sure these aspirations of the Kenyan person are achieved.
Right.
So number one is to make sure that the resources are devolved to the wards. And the way to devolve resources to the wards is to seek to increase the allocation to the devolved governments from the current 15% to 35%. And once this money reaches the counties, the further action is to allocate it directly to the wards, so that the ward is used as the primary unit of accelerated development. And that money will not be given to the wards according to the wishes or whims of the governor or the MP. We put it in law that every ward is allocated so much money. That way, every ward, for example, the proposal to have 1 million shillings per ward. What can't 1 million do in a year in a ward? So that is the basis. Then number two was the gender parity in representation. And so the proposal is we abolish the 290 constituencies and have 47 counties, the current ones, adopted for purposes of elections. Then, to ensure we have the equity, we vote one man and one woman. That will give us 94 MPs. Then from the Article 100 groups, which is the marginalized persons, the disabled, and the youth, we take one man and one woman. Those are 6. So total we have 100 MPs. There's a question being asked, is anybody going to agree to have their constituency abolished? And I can tell you, as someone who has been on the ground from Trans Nzoia to Murang'a to Marsabit, I can tell you, people do not want to hear about constituencies. As long as you guarantee them, money will come to the ward. So that's taken care of.
All right. All right. So, Harriet, please.
Just allow me to weigh on that. And for Eunice must actually articulate on this, because when we talk about striking off of the nomination positions, which has been very key, and this is something that Kenyans need to embrace, because the whole idea behind BBI proposals and Punguza Mizigo proposals is to actually reduce the cost in terms of what the government is spending in running its administrative costs.
Right.
Then the question number 2 then would be, our biggest problem as we sit today is corruption. You know, and those are the kind of legislative positions that we need to see when it comes to advocating for changes within within the reforms. And when I look at the proposals within the Punguza Mizigo bill,
Right.
the question then I want to pose to Eunice is whether, by striking off the nomination posts, is it adding value to the government as it is right now? How are we going then to completely work on this big monkey called corruption? How are we going to resolve that? Because if you ask me right now, the one big thing that we need to be working on is corruption.
Right.
So how are we going to solve that problem so that even these monies that we are devolving to the county governments, we are 100% sure that they are going to do that which is supposed to do, especially on devolved funds.
Right, absolutely.
Number one.
And we've seen, let me respond to that, because we've seen these comments coming with some saying, even if you reduce legislator to 100, they might just steal the same amount of money.
Yes.
Considering we don't have the, accountability mechanisms in place for the same. Talk to us about that.
I will talk on behalf of Punguza Mizigo Bill. Initially, let me just say, the bill was just about reducing parliament. But when the team went out to the ground, people said exactly what my VP and senior has said. Corruption is our biggest problem. So then the bill stopped being about reducing parliament, but addressing a myriad of issues relating to what people want to see. So for corruption, the proposals in Punguza Mizigo are actually very radical. Number one, it states that the report from the Auditor General should be used as a basis for investigations and prosecution. Now remember, the report from the Auditor General is not just a report, it's actually a finding, because the Auditor General comes to your office, for example, if it's a ministry, asks you questions. We can see this money has been spent. Where are the supporting documents? People traveled, you spent 20 million on air tickets. Where are the tickets? Where is the LPO? Where is the voucher? Where did they go? Who invited them? For what purpose? Now, after asking you those questions, he gives you time to answer. If you do not answer, then he will make a finding that 20 million is not accounted for. And that is why, for Punguza Mizigo, they're saying, why can't the DCI and the DPP use that report to now charge? Because that's a finding.
All right.
Okay, that's number one. The next thing is, we put it in the Constitution, a timeline. If you are charged, number one, that means you are adversely mentioned, you leave the office, you don't step aside, you leave the office. You're investigated, you're charged and all that. Once you're convicted,
that's it.
Life.
And you see, the confusion here is that, as it is, we have one of the most progressive constitutions, in the world. And so how much change is changing it on paper going to reflect with the situation on the ground? We don't have too much time, but Harriet, I want us to talk about other emerging issues that are coming up in this push for a referendum. And this is the things like the hiccups in terms of preparedness of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission as well.
Thank you very much. One thing I must say, there's no major changes we'll make in the Constitution that will make us feel the impact of its implementation if, number one, we are not ready to implement it. We have a very good document in place. Let's start by that. The work that went into that document is immense, So the question then is, even if we change the Constitution right now, are we ready? Are we ready to implement the provisions of that Constitution? Now, issues to do with boundaries. This country, it's a colonial issue. We've been fighting over boundaries for the longest time. And currently, as we speak, there are proposals that now we collapse the counties back to 47. We go back to almost the old system and come back with a parliamentary system in terms of how we run the activities of this country. Right. You've seen the emerging issues now, the debate on whether we need deputy governors in office.
Absolutely.
That's a key debate, because even as we run government right now, what is the role of deputy governors? What is the role of CC? Are all these roles defined? And if we cannot be able to define these roles, then there will always be a conflict, between the governors, the deputy governors, and even the CCs. How are these people put in office? How are they fired? What kind of work, when I walk into the office from morning to evening, what have I done? What do I have to show that this is what I have done from morning to evening? So we need to rethink the administrative process and reshuffle it completely so that we have a system that works. We have a system where we don't have bottlenecks, where if you have a sitting governor and the deputy, how then can they dispense of their duties without having bottlenecks when it comes to dispensation,
Right.
So that is very important, and this is a discussion that we should have. It's an open discussion that we should have, and we have viable solutions so that even as we go forward and we implement some of these changes that are now coming up, are they watertight?
Right.
Are we ready to live with those changes and move forward?
Very important questions to ask. But even as we wind up, LSK will be holding its annual general meeting. What has been the role of the Law Society of Kenya really in interpreting the Constitution, interpreting the legal aspects that come into this conversation?
LSK plays a crucial role, noting that first, advocates as advisors, and then advocates who even sit in parliament. So we have parliamentarians who are actually advocates as well. And law society as well also needs to be advising government and on matters law reform. And the society works with a number of stakeholders. So law society is at the forefront. We've already even put in place our proposals to the BBI. We have put in place our proposal to parliament in terms of the finance bill. So we play a very crucial role in terms of rule of law, in terms of the kind of statutes that are coming up from parliament. So our main role is advisory, basically. And I want to believe that it's something that we are working on, it's something that we are doing, and it's something that we need to do, even as advocates in our individual capacities. Yeah.
All right, many thanks. Eliza Harriet Chigash is the Vice President of the Law Society of Kenya, which will be holding the annual general meeting this week. We've also been speaking to lawyer Eunice Nganga, who is also a proponent of the Punguza Mzigo bill. This conversation coming in the wake of the push for constitutional reforms in the country. Now, the annual Turkana Cultural Festival is set to kick off this on Wednesday in Turkana. The four-day event will bring together members of the Turkana community from Kenya and other neighboring counties to display their culture. Our reporter Elvis Koskei is